I am an extremely passionate and committed human services professional who possesses an in-depth working knowledge of the psychological and sociological aspects of human development. I consider myself to be a cognitive behavioral specialist, believing that making a change in how one thinks brings about a change in what one does. Many shy away from therapy because they feel their situations are either unique or they are fearful, embarrassed, or ashamed to let others know they need help. SciSpot is my way of corralling pertinent personal, professional, and academic information on understanding human development in one place for all to access privately and even share with others. My personal mission statement is, I am driven by divine precepts and an undying passion to facilitate change in the lives of others. What's yours? Let SciSpot guide you through your healing and provide you with many other ways of becoming better today than you were yesterday. Come on in and join me.
Good morning and welcome all to SciSpot. I'm your host as always, Sabir Aleem. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Beautiful day. It's about 75 degrees this morning. I'm looking forward to being back on the beach again today. As most of you should know by now, I love the sun, right? It's very stimulating, energizing, a source of strength and energy. So, we left off last week, we were talking about behaviors, adult behaviors that are indicative of childhood trauma. So, we left off with number 9 on this list from the healthyplace.com website, right? Which is 15 common signs of unresolved trauma. So number 9 on this list was dissociation as a real disconnect in situations and conversations. So what I wanted to do was define for you dissociation, because that's a real heavy piece there, and I'm not going to delve into that because I'm not that learned in that area, even though I've worked with those who have Axis 1, Axis 2 diagnoses, which are personality disorder, mood disorders, thinking disorders, and that nature. I've never worked with a person who has had a dissociative disorder or who has been diagnosed as having such. So what I do want to do is tell you what it is. Dissociation can be defined as disruptions in aspects of consciousness, identity, physical actions, and or the environment. When a person experiences severe dissociation symptoms, they may be diagnosed with a dissociative disorder. The specific signs and symptoms of dissociation for any given person vary depending on the type of dissociative disorder they experience, which there's a list that you can kind of look at. When dissociation symptoms become severe, they can disrupt daily life. Causes. The causes of dissociation typically include trauma, because remember, that's what we've been talking about for the past 6 weeks. Often prolonged trauma, such as sexual or physical abuse in childhood. And the specific, it says in childhood. So let me read it to you again so you're clear. The causes of dissociation typically include trauma, often prolonged trauma, such as sexual or physical abuse in childhood. The stress of war or natural disasters may also cause dissociation. Dissociation is more common in children, which is why this particular behavior is often developed in childhood. Dissociation is a coping skill used to separate the person from the traumatic event or events and memories of the traumatic events. Children find it particularly easy to step out of themselves as their identity is still forming. Dissociation may be worsened during times of stress, even in adulthood, in those who have learned this coping skill. I'm going to stop there for a minute because I want to take you back to the discussion that I was beginning to have in part, I think about a week or two ago, in terms of beating a child and how children are beat either by the hand, by an extension cord, by a belt, by what they call them, switches that they go out from in the yard and pull that, and you're inflicting pain upon the child. And if you just take for a minute, right, and just ask somebody who's in the house with you to go grab a belt, and while you're sitting there watching me live, for them to just take that belt and lash you across your arm. Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go into fight or flight mode, right? Now, as an adult, more than likely, you will go into fight mode, right? But the other side to it is when you look at the trauma, right? If there's trauma attached to that because that happened as a child, you may go into flight mode. You may withdraw. You may cower, depending on who the person is and what the circumstance is. I want you to be clear on this, because this plays out in your relationships, right? If you had a male-dominated environment as a female, and that happens from a male, how are you going to react? If you're groomed in a female-dominated environment, and the female does that, how are you going to react? You got to look at these kind of things, right? But the pain that comes along with the beating, because remember, a child is in the learning stages, right? We should all be remaining in a learning stage as adults as well. But when children are being groomed and parented, cared for by us, right? They don't understand what they're being beat for because you told them. We want to believe that. We want to believe, well, they can understand English. Well, if they really understood the behavior, would they really be doing it if they understood the significance of it? Yes. Sometimes we do things that we know the significance of, and we still do it. But when you're beating a child for doing something that you feel is wrong, whether society sees it that way or not, but the child doesn't understand that. The child has no understanding whatsoever. But you're beating me, telling me how wrong I am for what I did. How do you think that's going to play out in their developmental stages of trying to understand the world around them? You have to understand this. This is real important. Because every time you slap a child in the face, every time you spank a child on their behind, every time you chastise a child in the capacity of an adult where that child has no clue, has no idea. They don't understand the significance of outcomes yet. You do. You do. So what you're actually demonstrating is your own inability to manage that situation. And because you don't know how to appropriately manage that situation, you put pain and suffering upon a child. The child comes to understand pain and suffering in a capacity that they don't need to. Therefore, their learning becomes interrupted. You have to understand this. You interrupt a learning process. That's where the withdrawal, that's where the disconnect begins to come in. Because now I have to find a way to cope. Because I don't want to be a part of any of this. And you also have to go back to understanding as a child. This is new. I've never been here before. I have no idea what I'm faced with. I've been in the womb for all of this time, dependent upon my mother, who's been carrying me. She's been protecting me. It's safe. I hear things. It's muffled in sounds. Right? I hear those kind of things going on. I hear voices, but they're somewhat muffled. They're not very clear because of where I am, because of all the fluid that's all around me. Then I come out into this world that I know nothing of. You've been in this world as an adult, or in some cases a so-called adult. You've been in this world. You've experienced some things. You know some things. You've learned some things. What you have to look at is what you've learned and how you're applying it to your own child, right? And what harm you may be causing your child because of the application of your learnings to that child's life. So this child, unbeknownst to them, right, is being chastised for something that you already know. And because the child doesn't know, you want to beat them. What would it be like for you if you got beat? Or that person that I told you go get in the household to get that belt stood next to you, and every time you had a response to something that was being said by me on this video, they hit you with the belt because you didn't understand. That's what you're doing to a child. So when child and family services and everybody got involved with, you know, what was happening in terms of a child being abused, they have to investigate all of these things, because at the end of the day, if these things are not appropriately addressed, we're going to have what we have today in terms of our children out in the streets doing what it is they're doing to others. They're abusing others. They're beating up others. They're clicking up with bad people, you know, who are doing bad things, right? Because they have been ill-conditioned. They're still responsible for it, right? Don't get me wrong. They're still responsible, but they have to be taught correctly. And they obviously haven't been, because anytime a child thinks that it's okay to walk up to somebody and sucker punch them, all in the name of reputation, all in the name of trying to establish, you know, my part in this group, there's something wrong with that. But it was learned at home. So when we talk about sexual abuse, when we talk about physical abuse that happens to a child in the household, right, these things play out in many ways. In many ways. Shoving a child around, that's abuse. I was just watching the video that somebody had, D.L. Hughley had posted this video on, there was a woman who was babysitting, supposedly according to the video, her girlfriend's daughter. Right? The adult was sitting on the side of the bed. Now she looked like she was pregnant herself, but I kind of, you know, enlarged it. She looked like she was pregnant herself. She's sitting there. The child looked like it was every bit of 1, maybe 2 years old. And she was sitting here, and the child was walking maybe about 4 feet away from her, because she knew this woman. Apparently, she was afraid of this woman. But this was the woman she was always left with. But because she couldn't articulate that to her mother continued to trust in a friend, as we often do. So the child was walking by, and she told the child, walk over here, like right next to me. Right? And the child walked around like, I'm not coming over there. And she snatched the child, she pushed the child down. I said, walk over here, and the child would not walk anywhere near her. And she continued to hit and push that child. That's abuse. It's abuse in every form conceivable, right? Anytime you come to a point in the relationship with a child, and you're having a hard time, right, interacting with that child, you need to take a look at you. You need to take a look at you. And, you know, our parents parented us the way they were parented. And again, I'm going to keep going back to, we keep having this conversation about you need to knock that child on his or her behind, right? Because that's what worked for you. That's what you believe worked for you. But when you look at your own condition, when you look at the signs and symptoms that I've been talking about over the last 6 weeks in terms of the impact that childhood trauma has upon adult relationships, really take a look at yourself and ask yourself, did those beatings really benefit you? Did they really? Yeah, and we don't want to look at that kind of stuff. See, we don't want to look at ourselves. It's so easy to look at others, but when we have to look at our own condition, it's a difficult thing to do, because none of us just open our arms and just, okay, just give it to me. Give me the criticisms. Tell me about my deficiencies, my shortcomings. Nobody openly receives that. But at the end of the day, you keep hearing it from loved ones. You keep hearing it from people close to you. You keep feeling it. You don't know what you're feeling. But it continues to happen. So when you start looking at this whole dissociative piece, you really have to begin to look at your life and how you interact with the world around you, because it was formed, it was developed, right, from childhood. So who you are today, you're still that child. Just because you've aged, right, and matured in some areas, don't mean that there's some areas that are underdeveloped or undeveloped, right? Because that's part of the ownership that we have to take. We think because we're of a certain age and because we've achieved certain things that we're beyond those kind of things. And we're not. Symptoms of dissociation. Symptoms of dissociation are different depending on the type of dissociation the person experiences. Some of the symptoms of dissociation, as defined by Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, which is the DSM-5, which is what we're currently using today. We recently switched over from the 4 to the 5, which was a nightmare for if you're dealing with HMOs. You kind of know making that transition, was like a real pain in the behind. But so if you ever get a chance to look into dissociative disorder, you can go to the healthyplace.com website, or just type in DSM-5, Roman numeral 5. And if you don't know what the Roman numeral is, don't ask me, because I don't know either. I think it's VI. But if you forget what the Roman numeral is, just type in the number 5. It'll come up, and look up dissociative disorder. And don't make the mistake that so many do. Right? Go look at the disorder and say, hey, that's me. That's not what I'm saying to you. That's not what I'm asking you to do, because you have to meet a criteria. There's certain ones on there that you have to meet in order to say that this is what you may be. Psychiatrists will say, okay, it's 1, 4, and 6, therefore this makes you that. I just want you to look at the symptoms, because you can have a variety of symptoms. One thing, and it really be something else, right? So there has to be a whole assessment done of you. And you have to be honest when that interview happens, because you need to be able to see where you're really at if you want to get help. You have to be open, and you have to be honest and forthcoming with what you know. Because one of the things that talked about in here is there's some things that you don't know, because the human being protects itself, the mind protects itself automatically. But then, as I mentioned in the list, the other part to it is it's intentional. You don't want to remember. You're avoiding remembering. When things happen in your life that present, that trigger, that within you, you fall back from it. And that's part of that separation from people, places, and things that was talked about. I think it was like number 7. Right? You begin to avoid people and places that trigger it. And sometimes you're already in a relationship with somebody. Sometimes you're married to that person. And you begin to disconnect from that person and really don't understand why. And it's not that person. It's the circumstance, and there's something about that circumstance that's making you feel very uncomfortable. So, symptoms here they also have a major inability to remember personally relevant events in a way that can't be accounted for by regular forgetfulness or a medical condition. And it parenthesizes amnesia. Second bolded item, confused and dazed, wandering, known as a dissociative fugue. Number 3 bullet item, 2 or more identities or personality traits within a single person. And that, I want to stop there for a minute. It brings to mind, if you haven't seen the movie Split, that's a really, really good depiction of a dissociative disorder. That's a very severe depiction, but it gives you an idea. And A Beautiful Mind is another one. That's a real. It really kind of paints a picture for you, of these thought disorders, right? Because you listen, things. When trauma happens, the body goes into protect mode, shuts things down, stops this from happening, because it's a chemical reaction that starts happening inside of you, right? It's a chemical reaction. Now, what you saw in the movie Split and A Beautiful Mind this was a movie that was played out, but this actually was going on inside of the person. You were able to get a visual for what a dissociative disorder looks like, what schizophrenia looks like. It was a movie. Now imagine living that. And many of us are living that. We are. We've learned to manage these things over the years. And there's still some things that we're protecting ourselves from because we don't want to face it. We just don't. All of us have something. All of us. So you're not exempt. You're not exempt. Back to the list. Transfer of behavioral control to each identity. And again, I bring up the movie Split because that was the dissociative disorder. Did you see how each person had a responsibility? The little boy who wanted to help, the other one who was controlling, no, what are you doing? And when you look at your own actions and your own mind and the things that are playing out in your mind and how you're dealing with things in life, look at how you deal with things. Look at how you don't deal with things. Look at all of these things, because these things are really important. See, it's not about the other person. It's never about the other person. It's about you. And because you share it with the other person about what it is that particular action they did to you, or how it affected you. It's not that you're doing it to me. It's that when you do this, I do that. When you talk to me in this way, I feel this. It's not blaming you. It's simply saying that when these things happen that come from you, you being you, I'm not trying to tell you not to be you. I'm just saying that when these things come from you, this is what I go through. It's not making it your fault. But if I keep feeling this way, right, and I'm trying to work through it, if I keep feeling this way, it's a good chance that I need not be in this relationship. And it's not you, it's me. That's why I keep telling people, listen, I tell people I've been married 4 times. You'd be like, wow, what? 4 times? What are you doing wrong? Well, let's look at the fact that I've married 4 times. How many times have you been married? Okay. So I've married. I got into a relationship and I sought to marry. Okay? But it's not who's wrong. It's a matter of 2 good people being in a situation that just didn't work. There's no, the blame is not going to bring any resolve to any of that. It didn't work. Period. So when it talked about the control to each identity, you have this, you have to look at, what situations you're passive in, what situations you're aggressive in, what situations like you're a professional and you're straight, you're on top of your game on that, but when you're not in the professional mode, your personal life is a wreck. Or your professional mode is a wreck, and your personal life is on point. You portray this confident person all around everybody else, but you can't stay on task with your craft. So you have to look at what the control aspect looks like. Who has the control? Which person of you has the control? Who's been assigned that control? Let me see. Feelings that objects in the external world are changing in shape and size. And again, we have some very severe cases, and we have some cases that are not so severe. But a dissociation of any capacity is serious. Feeling that people are automated and inhuman. And again, that's a whole nother aspect of the severe cases. When a person experiences a dissociative disorder, these symptoms cause significant distress or impairment in important areas of functioning, such as at school or interpersonally. And interpersonally, we're talking about how you interact with everybody else around you. The portrayal of that person or those persons who you have within you. Signs of dissociation. There are signs of dissociation in addition to the above symptoms of dissociation. These signs include mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts and actions. Think about it, folks. Just think about it. All right? A sense of detachment from oneself. Seeing one's life as if it was a movie. Like, this can't be real, and you're just kind of living through this, and it's just not real. This can't be happening. My life can't. And people, listen, it happens all the time. An unclear sense of identity. An unclear sense of identity. Identity. Talk about sexual identity. This says identity. Who I am. Who am I? Who am I? A presence of multiple people talking or living in your head, or a feeling of possession by another identity. And again, you have very severe cases, and at the end of the day, they're all serious, no matter what it is that they are, and help is there. I keep reminding everybody, and I just had a conversation with a brother on the beach yesterday. People of color don't use therapy for, listen, whether it's substance abuse issues, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's marriage counseling, whether it's just some counseling that I need just so I can get myself on track. Trust me, I have been through counseling. I've been through counseling. When I got clean and from that lifestyle of criminality and drugs and all that stuff like that, I found that there were some things I needed to deal with. A host of things. My childhood was the biggest aspect of all of this. It was it was the core of my difficulty. You learning how I was self-medicating my depression and anxiety. Learning all those things about myself. You have to learn how to manage these things, or you'll find yourself standing on the edge of a bridge, standing on a stool with a rope around your neck, or other means, because it's just too much. It's too much. Because it's compounded. When we look at trauma, we have to look at events, and we have to look at everything else that we encounter in life. It's all compacted within us. So you got to purge yourself. You always got to find a way to purge yourself. You got to find moments to meditate, to look at you, to stop looking at the other person, to look at you. To look at you. Purge yourself. It's like exercise, eating right, being in the right environments. And people say, well, what about those who live in these environments? So, well, you can learn how to live in chaos, in internal peace. You can learn how to do it. If you make a decision to remain where you are, to remain living where you are, because that's where you have to be, you have to learn how to manage that internal stuff. And the purging comes through counseling. Through counseling. Okay, so Here's another one. Number 10, which is after dissociation, is hypervigilance. And it's parenthesized a constant feeling of being on guard. So I also went to get the definition of that from the website verywell.com, right? People who have lived through trauma have good reason to feel that they should be hyper aware of possible danger. Hypervigilance, however, is an exaggerated state of awareness and is one of the hyperarousal symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Right? Now, a person who is hypervigilant is constantly tense and on guard. A person experiencing this symptom of PTSD will be motivated to maintain an increased awareness of their surrounding environment, sometimes even frequently scanning their settings to identify potential sources of threat. Not surprisingly, hypervigilance can lead to a number of social, emotional, and physical issues when it occurs in a normal setting. What are the symptoms? Hypervigilance is often accompanied by changes in behavior, such as always choosing to sit in a far corner of a room so as to have an awareness of all exits. At extreme levels, hypervigilance may appear similar to paranoia. PTSD sufferers with hypervigilance live in a long-lasting state of insecurity. To prevent the traumatic experience they lived through from happening again, they become preoccupied with spotting potential threats. As a result, hypervigilant people startle easily, making it a bad idea to sneak up on an individual who's in such a state. Being in a new or uncomfortable environment can exacerbate the symptom of hypervigilance. People in hypervigilant state also experience physical symptoms. It is typical for such individuals to begin sweating when they're in settings that frighten them or make them uncomfortable. Often their heart rate quickens and they may experience shallow or rapid breathing as well. Right? So just listen to that for a minute. I want to go back to where it says PTSD sufferers with hypervigilance live in a long-lasting state of insecurity. Now I want you to take a long-lasting state of insecurity, right? I want you to take that and I want you to go back to childhood and I want you to look at childhood abandonment. Childhood abandonment, right? I want you to look at that first. Then I want you to add on beatings, which is physical abuse. See, unlike with drugs, there's use and abuse. Childhood, there is no physical use. It's abuse. If you are hitting a child in order to teach them something, right, there's a problem. So you put abandonment along with physical abuse. Now you've compounded the two together. Right? Because when you look at prolonged trauma, when you look at the duration of the traumatic event, when like the beatings are every day or every other day, or they just sporadically throughout the course of the day, and then I'm living in a single parent environment, or I'm living in an environment where one parent is physically present but emotionally absent, so they don't have the ability to do certain things, that they can't protect me from the other parent. And if you're in a relationship with another adult who is emotionally absent and the other adult is emotionally available, then you're going to have ongoing conflict because the other person is avoiding emotions. Right? Now, you compound all of this together. Right now, I'm entering into school. And my interpersonal relationships are greatly affected by the compounded traumatic events that have happened in my life. So now I'm not easy with making friends. I'm probably going to be teased and taunted and probably abused by them, physically and emotionally. right? How I react to that will be based on my conditioning as to how my environment reacted to those kind of things. Or if I get to the point where I'm just fed up and I explode, right? But no matter which way you look at it, if I don't address that unresolved from my childhood, it's going to carry on into my adult relationships. I won't trust anybody. I'll always be suspicious of everything you do, no matter how good, you are to me, no matter, how much you provide, what you take locks off your phone, you don't put password things on password protected, you take me to the places that you frequent so I'm comfortable, you meet my friends, I meet yours and all that kind of stuff. It won't matter. It won't matter. At the end of the day, until that person addresses the insecurity that's related to the childhood trauma, right? They will always be that way. Always. When you enter into a relationship, and this would be a whole nother discussion, when you enter into a relationship with someone, what they show you first, they will show you last. They will show it to you coming in. They will show it to you when you're walking out the door. It will always be there, unless they are seeking to bring resolve to it. So when things present themselves in a relationship and you bring it up, you bring it to their attention because it affects us. And look at their response, look at your reaction. Because there's a response and a reaction. The reaction is going to be the first thing they do when you say it. Or when you approach them to say something, because they are trigger words. Can we talk? The trigger. Bam, right into defense mode. All that stuff flares up. Now everything else that you say from that point forward, you have to look at all those things. But when you start looking at the long-lasting insecurity piece, right, that's a real heavy piece. And you really want to pay attention to that, especially if you are one of those very insecure people. And it's nothing that the person has done to cause you to be that way. It's no justification for it. And if you're with a person who you don't trust, why the hell are you with them? Anywho, number 11 on that list is suicidal thought or actions. A lot of times people really don't understand what a suicidal thought is. Some people just think it's a matter of, they have a thought of, I want to kill myself. And it doesn't happen always that pronounced. Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it'll happen whereas you'll sit there and you're just like, I'm just so tired of this. I'm really tired of this. I just sick of it all. You're in that process. Because what does that mean? What does that mean? Excuse me. Because that's what it means. It means you're contemplating, right, suicide. And you'll say to yourself, well, no, I don't want to kill myself or nothing like that, but because, oh no, that would be, God forbid I do that, because, oh no, that's forbidden, we're not allowed to, but you thought about it, and you missed the thought, right? You downplayed it. You called it something else, something that was most comfortable for you. Because Lord knows you don't want to say, I feel like killing myself, because it just sounds so harsh. But that's what you're saying. I can't imagine my life without her, without him, right? There's something you have to look at. Now, we're not just talking about like, okay, this person is leaving and then, they're moving on and, the relationship, when it's course and whatnot. We're talking about I'm looking at the part where it's so devastating that, sure, I've been with you for some time and I want to be with you and I'm going to miss you dearly. Absolutely. Wow, never thought that that's a whole different thought. But when you sit down and start thinking about, I don't know what I'm going to do. when she leaves? How am I supposed to go on? It's key words that you're telling yourself, and you need to look at those things. Because you have to go on. But when you're telling yourself that you don't see how you can go on, that's a problem. That's a suicidal thought. Not that I'm gonna get this knife and I'm going to go. That's a more vivid one. That's a more actualized one. That's a more definitive one. The subtle ones have to be looked at as well. They have to be looked at as well. And you'll find that it's not just related to that circumstance. It's related to prior unresolved, and usually in childhood. Now, we know again that as you get older, you come into similar situations and you get traumatized again and again and again and again. And sometimes you're re-traumatized, but at the end of the day, it's compounded. Childhood, young teenager, young adulthood. And young adulthood, according to Freud, does not end until the age of 39 years old. So that's a lot. And it's a lot of things that happen. So depending on what happens and how you internalize what happens, it will really determine how you're going to react and respond to situations as they happen moving forward. And then the actions, the suicidal actions, taking a lot of sleeping pills, excessive drinking, trying to drink yourself to death, thinking that if I just drink too much, I'll just, not pass out, but just die from alcohol toxicity or something. Go attempt to cut your wrists, and instead of going across, you're actually, doing it that way because you want to die, but you don't want to die. You want help. Just a number of things. You're sitting there with the gun sitting on your lap, right? And all it takes is just that momentary thought to just, it's just, and I just had a moment where I'd saved, with the help of others, someone who had actually hung themselves. And I just remember, what it was like seeing this person with the rope, they had an extension cord, or industrial extension cord, contracted extension cord. And, and what he felt like afterwards, after he came through it, because he was in the hospital for a while. But after he came through it, he felt worse because he hadn't achieved it, and having to live his life now, with that memory. It didn't help him. We saved his life, but the life that he had to live, has to live after all of this. So a lot more comes along with that. Uncontrollable anger and acting on it is number 12 on the list. And again, it's very specific. Uncontrollable anger, implying that anger is a natural human development. You have to learn how to manage it. You have to control it, because we all get angry, right? But when you start looking at uncontrollable anger, where you just snap about everything, where it's just everything that is said, everything that is done, you're just like, what do you call it? It's over-exaggerating. Like you're that make a mountain out of a molehill kind of person, that you just blow up, you go all in on the person about a particular thing. And it says acting on it. So the first thing is like to feel it, right? And I always tell people, listen, I can tell you, if I say something crass out of my mouth, I can tell you that I said it, right? If you call me on it, right? But if I'm in the moment and I'm being crass with you, right? I know that's what I'm being. I know what I'm coming about. I know why, in most cases, why I'm coming at you that way. Because I had a feeling and or thought about a particular thing that just happened. And my perception of what just happened, right, is guided by what? My conditions. By what? Childhood events, things that I learned throughout the years. Those things, that's part of it. You can't disconnect those things. We manage it. But when you start feeling all this anger, when you're walking around and you don't think that you're angry, but you feel like this tension, you feel this, right? That's uncontrollable anger. And then as soon as something is said or done, you just go all in. That's not good. The next part of it is, so you're feeling all this, now you act on it. Put your hands on people, get up in people's faces, yelling and screaming out the car window, snapping in the car, on the phone. Listen, I know what that feels like. I was that guy for a long time because of what I experienced throughout my childhood and early adult life, teen life, things that I experienced. Just angry. You ever meet somebody, that's just an angry man. Because everything they can, that's how they always are. It's like they fall short of growling and hissing at you every time you see them, right? So yeah, you want to look at that. If you're feeling that way, right, and you are self-medicating to like kind of keep yourself from feeling that way, go get some help. There's so many of us walking around with health care in our pockets and don't even use it. Spiritually dying, spiritually dead, and can get some relief. Going to the gym is a great part of releasing stress and releasing a lot of negative energy. But if you don't know what the energy is, what's the point? Think about it. What's the point? You need to get rid of, you need to purge yourself of that issue so you can enjoy the workout. Number 13 falls in line with suicidal thoughts and actions, as far as I'm concerned, self-harm, cutting, and mutilation. It puts those three together, but a lot of things that fall under self-harm are some of the things that you do on a daily basis. Some of the high-risk situations you put yourself in. Risky behaviors with high-risk people. Can be also considered part of self-harm. But this is specific to cutting and mutilation. So you want to look at the kind of things that you're doing to yourself. Some people just like they bite their nails down all the way to it's like bleeding, and they just keep doing it and their fingers are bleeding, and they don't even realize that they're doing it, but it's a matter of coping, because it's a coping mechanism to do that. Or they're just picking at their skin, or they're sitting with a razor blade or a knife, and they're always this brings them relief. If you've never worked with the mental health population that use self-mutilation as a means to cope, it's a serious thing, man. And there's a lot of people who do it because it brings relief to them, and you'll never see it because they cut themselves in areas where you can't see. Like I knew one person they used to cut their thighs, and they never wore shorts. They always wore long pants, so you would never see the cuts. One day I noticed some blood on their pants, and I said, well, what's happening with that there? And just, oh no, I just spilled such and such. But you can kind of see that it wasn't something that was like spilled on. You can see it was coming from underneath because of the way it was stained. It was coming up. So I just called it psychic. They took care of it. But it's a lot of people who do it, man. It's a lot of people who do it. It's a lot of people who have fetishes, and they turn into forms of abuse. having someone perform certain things upon them, as a means to release that that pain. That's one of those high risk situations. So it's a lot of things that people do in terms of self-harm. And obviously, substance abuse is another one of those areas. Wow, time just flies. Not being able to tolerate conflicts as they once would have. I'll be the first to tell you that, having been married 4 times and having dealt with a lot of things throughout the years of my life, my tolerance level for a lot of things has greatly changed. When you look at this from a perspective of trauma, right? You kind of start looking at the cart before the horse scenario. You enter into a relationship and you already bring the insecurities. You already bring the guardedness. And having that in the forefront of your mind when interacting with another person stands in the way, because you're already questioning and challenging and scrutinizing and assessing and hyper analytical of everything that comes from this person, not recognizing that this is also a matter of intolerance, right? Because you're already locked onto a preconceived idea of everybody. So unlike having multiple failed relationships and looking at behaviors that happen in those relationships and saying, well, I'm not going to allow this to be a part of this relationship, this is a whole different level of intolerance. When it talks about here not being able to tolerate conflicts, the smallest thing brings forth that uncontrollable anger. Listen, I've experienced it, right? I've been on both sides of it. I've been the giver of it at a point in my life, and I've been the recipient of it at a point in my life, right? Very aware of those things, right? For me, and this is a whole nother show, I'm one of those people who has been identified as being too, what's the word I'm looking for? Accommodating. I'm too accommodating. So I tolerate a lot of things because I understand that the relationship has to develop. I understand that things take time. Now, how much time I allow, before is not, I don't allow that time again today because I have a better understanding. But, it's just some things that you have to look at in terms of what you're willing to work with and what you're not willing to work with. And when you have situations where people present where like there's always conflict and confrontation, they're always questioning and challenging everything that is said, and you seem to have an answer for everything, it's almost cute in some capacity initially if I'm really trying to get at you, right? Oh yeah, you downplay it, right? Just to get the ultimate goal is obviously sex. Let's call it what it is. If you want me and I want you, that we tend to bypass, we turn a blind eye, a blind ear even, to situations as they present, right? But then afterwards, you still have to deal with that. And that's not a good thing, because it won't change. It's not going to change until that person has sought help. and you can't make anybody get help for anything. Let me make that very clear. No more than you can tell a person who is abusing drugs that they need to go into treatment and they're still getting high. They're going to go when they're ready. They're going to go when it's time. They're not going to stop till they want to stop. When you have people who present with this kind of behavior, who, just snap at everything, they go off at everything, they deal with things very negatively, that's not going to change, folks. It's going to always be that way. It's going to always be that way. They're responsible for their condition. You're responsible for yours. Move on. Because if they're not working on it, when you first have the interaction, you'll be like, I did this again. And I'm going to get help for it. And go. Well, because I want you to tell me when you're going. Don't tell me I'm going to get some help for this without, the plan of. So, listen, I made a decision. I'm going to call the doctor today. But I'm going to keep working on it. It's not acceptable. Not being able to tolerate conflicts as they once would have. There's something with that. I didn't do this before. It's not your fault. And when I'm saying it's not your fault, I mean, if the person is saying, well, before you, I didn't have this issue, it don't make it your fault. It just means that my conditioning along the way has got me to the point of intolerance. And it has more to do with trauma than failed relationships. Because if you put yourself in a relationship with someone and it goes to the left and it ain't going to the right, you got to roll out. Right? Because at the end of the day, the longer you stay, the more you become the volunteer and not the victim. You stay in it. Don't say, oh, well, you're supposed to love me and this, that, and the other. And no. Wrong answer. Number 15, and the last thing on that list, because we're at the hour, unexplained or irrational fears of people, places, or things. Irrational fears of people, places, or things. Look up the word irrational. Because it's easy. I'm not being rational. And you'll say it just like that and don't think that there's anything wrong with what you just said and how you said it. What is rational thinking? What is irrational thinking? And you have to look at those things. So, if you identify, back to the article on healthyplace.com, if you identify with any or all of the signs above, then you may want to ask yourself if it's time to talk with a therapist about your trauma. Is it easier to function as you are, or to work through the pain you have suffered? It's a question that only you can answer, but rest assured, you are not alone. You're not. There are many who are walking around today. I referenced Erykah Badu's song, Bag Lady, where there's bag men walking around too. We all have baggage. And as long as you continue to invest energy, time, and effort into pointing at the other person and tell them about their baggage, you're missing what you're carrying yourself. And you will continue to find yourself in the same condition for years to come. And for some, it's beyond being a rude awakening when they find out, damn, it's been me all the time. And not in Anita Baker, it's been you all the time. Not in that sense at all, right? But it's been you all the time. I have to accept when it's me. I have to accept when it's me. I have to accept when things, situations, relationships, be it with a partner, a life partner, my soulmate, my job, business, I have to make the determination as to whether I want to continue to stay in this relationship. And staying is on you. Stop using excuses for why you're staying. My very first paper in school was why some women remain in abusive relationships. Yeah. The same holds true for men. Right? Listen. It was so good to see all of you today live on Facebook, live on Twitter. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always, right? So again, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm actually looking at 3 different cameras. I'm looking at you on Facebook, I'm looking at my Canon camera, and I'm looking at my Samsung phone that has me live on Twitter, right? So I don't want you to think I'm like having like some kind of dissociative, episode here where I'm not looking at you on Facebook. I love all of you. Trina, Nate, Troy, Solomon, Maria, thank you all for tuning in, and Tara for giving me the thumbs up, and anybody else who's tuning in on Twitter live, anyone else who is tuning in on Facebook, and anyone who goes to my Daddy's Right Here educational station on YouTube. Because if you miss this episode on Sunday morning, when you get in from church, or whatever your outing is, right, you can pop it on. Pop it on. And you can go ahead and finish doing what you're doing in the house. You ain't got to look at me. Just listen. Right? I ain't that vain that I want you to sit down and watch me. I just want you to hear the message. And maybe you can put it on, during y'all family sit-arounds tomorrow evening. And y'all can have some open dialogue. Right? And maybe that'd be a good time to bring some closure